They couldn't send the traditional spies under diplomatic cover, but they did have all of these communists who spoke many languages. They'd worked in the underground. They knew how to take on new identities. So they sent these people as spies. They'd be traveling around. It was, a world without biometric passports, without computerized databases. So they'd often be kind of changing nationalities from day to day. And then over the next century, right until the present day, that program just keeps going on.
Now, it might sound like the plot of films or TV shows such as Bridge of Spies, The Americans, or Marvel's Black Widow, but no, Russia really has long infiltrated spies into target nations, spies who must master languages, dialects, psychology, body language and culture in order to maintain deep covers in the West. The journalist Shaun spent over a decade in Russia, which provided the backdrop for his new book, The Illegals, A History of Russia's Most Audacious Spies. And he joins me now. Hello, Shaun.
Hi.
Good afternoon. Thanks for being with us. What was the KGB's Illegals program? When did it begin?
So it basically goes all the way back, I discovered, to the start of the Soviet Union. And back then, the new Soviet state didn't have embassies with most countries, so they couldn't send the traditional spies under diplomatic cover. But they did have all of these communists who spoke many languages. They'd worked in the underground. They knew how to take on new identities. So they sent these people as spies. They'd be traveling around. It was, a world without biometric passports, without computerized databases. So they'd often be kind of changing nationalities from day to day. And then over the next century, right until the present day, that program just keeps going on. And obviously, as it gets harder and harder to create convincing foreigners, both from the point of view of language, documents, passports. So the training and the sort of backup system to run this program gets more and more complicated. And, by the 60s and 70s in the Cold War, these people are being taken out of university, being molded with years of kind of language, etiquette, history training until they're ready to be sent abroad, where the idea is they'll sort of blend into Western societies with no hint that they're Russians.
And that presumably worked. Did they blend into Western societies with no hint that they were Russians?
So many times they did, yeah. I mean, there's the program sort of littered with lots of failures, but also lots and lots of successes. Some of these missions could go on for 20, 30 years. People would have kids. The kids would not find out until often, late in their teens or 20s that they're not Canadians or Germans, but they're actually Russians. So sometimes it came off.
And how many people are we talking about? How many do we think there were?
So at the height of the program in the 60s and 70s, there were probably about 100 illegals in the field. Of course, now we don't know, and counterintelligence, I think, don't know. But we have seen since the war in Ukraine, the last 3 years, we've seen 6 or 7 illegals picked up. There was a couple where she was posing as an Argentinian gallery owner, and he was a software company manager. They were living in Slovenia, traveling around Europe, traveling to the UK as well. They were arrested at the end of 2022. So, every time you think, okay, in the modern world, this program doesn't work anymore, each time it seems that Russia is continuing with it.
You've got a great story about Costa Rica's ambassador to Rome in the 1960s. He was a Russian spy and the architect of Trotsky's murders. It's an astonishing story.
Yeah, he's one of them. There's so many great characters that I came across when I was researching this. But yeah, this is a guy, his name's Josif Grigorevich. He's a Soviet citizen.
Doesn't sound Costa Rican.
No, indeed. He was born in Lithuania, but he spoke great Spanish. He spent some time in the Spanish Civil War, where he started working for Soviet intelligence, and he later emerges. He's never been to Costa Rica, but he's living in Chile, and he gets friendly with a Costa Rican diplomat, and he spins this whole story that he's he was born out of wedlock to a Costa Rican noble, and now he wants to rediscover his heritage. So he gets a passport, and with this passport, the Soviets, KGB, sent him to Rome. And the guy is so charming that he's also got quite a lot of money, so Moscow's sending him money, and he's setting up all these business deals for different Latin Americans who are visiting Rome. He organizes an interview with the Pope for a group of visiting Costa Rican politicians. And at some point, they say, this guy is amazing. We want him to be our ambassador. So you have real name Josif Grigorevich, cover name Teodoro Castro. And he's there in Rome. He's meeting the Pope. He's meeting the Italian president. He gets accredited to become the ambassador to Yugoslavia, which is broken with the Soviet Union, and is actually being sent to assassinate Tito, the head of Soviet Union, head of Yugoslavia, who'd fallen out with Stalin. And the idea was that he would, during one of his diplomatic meetings with Tito, he'd open a box of plague serum, and everyone around would die except him, who'd be inoculated. And this sort of mad plan was only cancelled because Stalin died. But yeah, he disappeared off after Stalin's death to back to the Soviet Union, and the Costa Ricans never found out until the 1990s what on earth happened to their ambassador in Rome.
A remarkable story. Also, you've also found out a person who essentially inherited spycraft from his parents, Peter Herman. Tell us about him.
Yeah, he's somebody who I've been speaking to for the last few years. He's in his 70s. He's in late 60s now. But back in the late 1970s, he was a 14-year-old. His parents were, he thought, Germans who'd emigrated to Canada. And at some point, his dad sits him down and says, I'm not who you think I am. I'm not a right-wing German who misses the Nazi years. I'm actually a Soviet spy. I'm Czech. I work for the KGB. And then the kicker is, your mum also works for the KGB, by the way. And the kicker is, would you consider being a spy like me? And obviously the kid is pretty confused, pretty overwhelmed.
He's 16 at this point.
He's 14 at this point. Yeah. So he sort of says, okay, I guess so. And then this sort of extraordinary train of events goes on where the family take a circuitous route, including kind of sneaking onto a boat to get to Moscow. He meets his parents' handlers. They then say to him, they ask him if he'd like to be a spy as well, but they say, unfortunately now, there's one catch. You now know too much about your parents' work. So if you don't want to do this, which is fine, but you'll have to stay in Moscow while they go back and complete their mission. So faced with this rather unappealing choice, he agrees. And he makes a couple of trips to Moscow. They start training him. At this stage, he's 16. He's heading off to university. And at the beginning, his tasks are just to sort of look out for people who might have parents working for the US government, write personality reports on them. And probably very luckily for him, the FBI get the scent of his father, and the family is kind of rounded up and arrested just a few years after he starts this. So instead of having decades of this second-generation spying, and they agreed to cooperate with the Americans, they were resettled under a new identity. And that was 50 years ago nearly. And yeah, when I was interviewing him over the last years, you could see it was still an experience that had...
still pretty raw.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Yeah. Look, before I let you go, Shaun, what sense do we have that this is still going on?
Well, so we have seen 6 or 7 people arrested in the last few years. And kind of paradoxically, although for a while it seemed that why would you need to do this? The Soviet Union citizens couldn't travel. Now you have Russians traveling all over the place. Why would you need to go disguise someone as an Argentinian? I think paradoxically, because of the war in Ukraine, because all the diplomats have been expelled, because people now are once again suspicious of Russians. If you meet a very friendly Russian businessman who wants to get to know you, people will again become suspicious. I think the modern KGB, the SVR in Russia, has realized that these deep cover illegals do have a purpose again.
Wow. Look, Shaun Walker, thank you very much indeed. The book is The Illegals, Russia's Most Audacious Spies and the Plot to Infiltrate the West, and it's out tomorrow. And to order a copy, you can go to timesbookshop.co.uk. There's a special discount for Times Plus members. Thank you very much indeed, Shaun.